Welcome back. In this lecture, we'll explore elements. Elements are the components that have to reside in a window. In the last lecture, we have seen some popup contains buttons and other contains an input box with a file browser. All of these are called elements. So let's start by importing PySimpleGUI as SG, and let's explore the buttons. To put an element in a window, we will have to construct a layout. A layout is a list of lists. Each row in the list is equivalent to a row in the interface. So let's create a layout. This will be a list of lists, so list. I'll just type sg.button. I'll give it a name or the text that will be displayed on it. Then I can give it a parameter size, which is a tuple, and the size is in characters. Let's first display the button and then we will discuss everything. This, I will create a button. Then I will need to create a window to put the layout inside the window. To create a window, I'll use sg.window. I can give it a title, buttons, for example, and I'll have to pass the layout. If I did not pass the layout, it will create an error when I display the window. To display the window, to read the window provides event and values. These can be anything, but for convention, the name should be event and values. We will explore all of these in details in a minute. Okay, now let's read the window. To read the window, we'll use window.read. Now let's execute this, and it had displayed an error message because there is no layout. So I will pass in the layout parameter in here. Now let's read the window, and it had created a window with a button in it. If I click close in here, it will exit, but the proper way to do it is to use window.close, and we can print the event and value. And we will see what are these in a minute. The important thing in here that we have created a window with this command. We have passed in a layout which we have created in here that contain one button, and then after reading the window, it will provide event and values. We will close the window and we will print those. Okay, now let's create another layout and let's explore what is this layout means. So I'll declare another layout. I will create a list of lists again. I will use the same expression in here, and as you have seen, this had created a window with a single button on it. So let's create another button. I will create another list inside the list. I'll use sg.ptn, which is same as typing button. I will just give it a name, ptn, and I'll also give it a size, again 10 by 3, and I'll give it a parameter button color. I'll give it blue and green. Okay, now let's execute this. I'll copy these two cells, I'll paste them in here. Let's execute this and execute this, and this had created another window with two buttons. The first button, which is this one, is displayed on top. This had take a complete row represented by this list, and the other button, which is this one, again is taking a complete row in the interface with the colors blue, and green. And the size is 10 characters by 3 characters total. Okay? If I click button or PTN, it will return this as event. When I click on the button, it will return the name of the button and the values. There is nothing contained in the values now. Okay? Now let's modify this a little bit. I will copy these 3 rows. I'll paste them in here, and let's put each element in a row by itself so you can see what item in the layout correspond to what in the interface. Each list is separated by comma from the other list, and each list in here represents a row in the interface. Okay, now let's add a couple of more buttons. I'll just create sg.b, which is similar to button and ptn. I'll call this b. I will not give it other parameters. We have also predefined buttons in PySimpleGUI. If I use sg.ok, and if I want to add another button in the same row, as we will see, there is also sg.cancel. We have also yes and no buttons. Okay, now let's execute this and this, and this is our interface. We have 5 lists which correspond to 5 rows in the interface. If an element is inside a list by itself, this means that this element will be displayed in a complete row in the interface. If I want to display multiple elements in the same row, I'll separate them by comma inside the same list. For example, the OK and cancel button are inside a list. The yes and no button are inside a list. Okay, but this is a row and this is a row. This is a row and this is a row. This is a list and this is a list. So each list represents a row in the window. Okay, I'll click on yes. This will close the window and display the button that I have clicked. The event is what I have interacted with the window. For example, I have clicked a button, I have changed a value, I have closed the window. We will see this in details, but I wanted you to know what is event. Okay, so we will explore windows in much great details in the next lecture, but right now I want you to know how to create a button. To create a button, you can use button or ptn or b. Just like the pop-up, button have different parameters. The important ones are the size and the color. Okay, when we click on the button, it will return an event with the button name. Okay, now let's check the button menu. This is a menu. Okay, and if we right click in Jupyter Notebook, it will display a menu, and this is what is meant by a button menu. Okay, so let's create a menu. To create a menu, this is very simple. You will create a menu. For example, the menu have file, edit, view, and view is having submenu which contain, for example, list, details, and full. Okay, now let's create a layout. The layout is a list of lists. This layout will be sg.button menu. The button menu will take a name, and we will have to pass in a parameter called menu def or menu definition. I'll pass in the menu that we have created in here. Then I'll copy these 2 cells that we will test along the way to display the element. I'll execute the cell, and then this one, and we have created our button, which is called menu. If we clicked on it, it will display the menu in here, file, edit, view. View have a submenu which is list details and full. If I click on any one of them, it will display its value. Now we have a value that is returned in here. Okay? Previously, when we were exploring buttons, it did not have a value, but now we have a value. Okay? Now let's create a canvas. So let's create a layout. The layout is a list of lists. The first row will be sg.canvas. I'll give it a size, which is a tuple of 100 and 100, for example. I can give it a background color, which will be blue, for example, and I will give it something called a key. We'll explore the key later when we explore the windows, but a key is like a variable name. I am assigning it for the element so I can grab its value later. We'll explore this in great details later. I'll call it canvas, for example, and I will create another list which correspond to another row. This will have to button OK and sg.cancel. OK. And again, I will copy these two cells. I'll paste them in here, but this time I will do another thing. To be able to draw on the canvas before reading the window, I'll have to use a method called finalize. Finalize will allow us to make changes prior using read. I'll execute this, and this had created the window. Then I will create variable canvas, which will equal to window of canvas. To get the element, we will use the element key as we have defined it in here, and the window object is like a dictionary. I can just pass in the key and it will give me a handle to this element. Okay, now let's draw a circle, for example. So I will create a circle. This will be canvas dot tk canvas dot create oval, and I'll give it 50, 50, and 100. And now we can read the window, and it had created the oval inside the canvas. Okay, now let's create checkbox. I will create a layout which will equal to sg.checkbox. I will give it a name, checkbox. I will also create another row. This one will be sg.cbox, and I will create another row, sg.cb, and I will create two buttons, sg.ok, sg.cancel, and we will copy both our windows to create the window and display. Okay, let's execute this and this, and this have created three checkboxes. Checkbox is equivalent to cbox is equivalent to cb. I can select all of them, or I can remove the selection. Clicking on a checkbox will make it ticked. By the way, if I did not add the OK and cancel buttons, then to close the window, the only option we have is to click the close button, which will not return anything. Okay, so to rerun and display the window, we'll have to recreate the layout from the beginning. I'll just click execute the cell, and now if I click OK, it will display the event is we have pressed the OK button, and since none of them has keys, PySimpleGUI will assign them numbers. So first element is assigned to 0, second, 1, third, 2. We can use them like this, or the preferred method is to assign them a key. So I'll say this one is checkbox, but there is also a convention for the keys. Of course, you can use whatever you want, but the convention is to use hyphen, then capital letter, the name that you want to assign. Check 1, for example, or check 1, then hyphen, and then this one will have key, hyphen, check 2, and this one we will give it a key. Let's not give a key to this one. Now let's execute. I'll check the first one and the last one. Now let's click on OK, and the key for the first one is equal to true. The key for the second one equal to false. The third one, because it does not have a key, PySimpleGUI assign it a number, and since the first two elements have keys, so it started with 0. So to remove the confusion, you can just give it a key, or you will know that if the element doesn't have a key, then PySimpleGUI will assign it a number starting with 0. And again, the event is printed. If we click on cancel, the event will be printed, which is cancel, and all the values of the keys. Okay? So if the keys have a values and we click cancel, they are displayed as well. Okay, now let's check what is a column layout. Okay, let's create the columns and we will see how this will work. So I'll copy this and modify it in here. I'll give this name column 1 and I'll remove the buttons. So now this is a list of lists. Again, nothing has changed. I'll copy this cell and paste it in here, and I rename this column 2. I'll give this check 1 L, which means left L, and this will be R, and this will be R. Okay, now let's rename this L again. This is the name of the check. I am just giving them L and R so you can know which one is this. Okay, now let's again copy these 3. I will remove this and create a column. This column will contain column 1, and I'll create another column. I can use column or col, which are both the same thing, and I will give this to column 2. Now let's execute this. Okay, we have forgot to place a comma in here. So now when you see this error message, you will have to rerun it again. Okay, because we have executed this cell without the comma, then execute it again, so it had considered that this layout had been used. So you cannot use a used layout. Anyway, now we have created our window with 3 checkboxes on the left and 3 checkboxes on the right, and this is called a column layout. This is a column and this is a column. Of course, they doesn't have to be the same thing, as we will see later, but now we have created 2 columns layout. We can have multiple different columns. Okay, I will choose this, this, and this, for example. Let's click on OK and check what is returned. The event that is returned is OK. Check 1 true. That's why the naming or giving the element a key is very important. All the checkboxes that we have checked have true, otherwise they have false. We can also use a vertical separator, which we can put it in here as g.vertical separator. Let's execute this again, and this is the vertical separator. Okay, it's just for separating these elements. It's to divide the interface. Now let's check the combo box. I will create some values. I'll create list of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, for example, and this will create a list. Let's print the values. Okay, now let's copy and paste these. And instead of typing them, I'll just remove all of this and I will create a combo box. To create a combo box, I'll use sg.combo. sg.combo. Combo takes values, which is a list. We will use the list that we have created, and I can give it a default value or not. So let's first check this and see how it will work. I'll execute this, and it had created the combo box. It did not assign anything in here, and I think the size is a bit small, so let's modify this. I'll give it size equals to 5 and let's say 4. Now let's execute this again, and now we should have created another name for the values because the values overwritten by the values in here. Okay, I'll cancel this. I'll give this a name of data, for example, data and data. Let's execute this. Okay, now this is 5 characters wide and 4 characters long, which is the size in here. Again, the combo box doesn't have a default value. We can give it a default value in here by using default value parameter, and I'll assign it data of 0, for example. So let's execute this again, and now it has a default value. If I click OK, it will return this. I have clicked OK, and the value is A, but before it will be empty. Let's remove this and execute the same cell again. Now if I clicked OK, it's OK and an empty string. Okay, now let's check the frame element. When we want to group certain elements together, we can use a frame. So let's check how this will work. I will just copy and paste this in here. I will rename this to frame. I will give it the combo box, but in here I remove this and insert checkbox, checkbox left, and another one checkbox right. Okay, now let's create our layout. The layout will equal to sg.frame. I'll have to give it a name, my frame, for example, and I'll pass in the frame that we have declared, and I will just paste the 2 buttons that we are using. Now let's execute this. We have forgot to type checkbox in here. Okay, now this is our frame. Okay, it had grouped these elements inside this frame. Definitely you have seen something like this in lots of desktop applications, that to group certain types of related controls together, they are putting them inside a frame. Okay, let's also create a horizontal separator. This is simple. This is similar to the vertical separator that we have created before. I will just inside the frame create sg.horizontal separator. Don't forget the comma, otherwise you receive an error message. Let's execute this, and this is the horizontal separator. Okay, now let's create an image element. The image is an area that we can use to display an image. I have an image in here, a PNG. I will use it, and I'll also use our two, and let's copy and paste these two cells. Now let's execute this, and had displayed the image in the window. Had created an image element and displayed the image. The images supported are out of the box, are PNG. Otherwise, you will need either to convert a JPEG to a PNG, or you will have to use a binary stream. Now let's check the input. I'll just copy and paste these elements, and I will create an input. I'll give this a key of in1. Let's create another input. This I can use in. I'll give it a key in2, and I'll create another input called I. Let's execute this. Input and in and I are all comparable. I'll give this value A, B, C. Let's click OK. And it had returned the value entered in each of them. Of course, when you display a window like this, no one will know what these inputs are related to. So we will have to create another element to explain this. So we will use something called text element, which we will see later, but it's very simple. I'll give this a text input 1, for example, and when I put it in the same list as the first input, it means it will be displayed beside it. I'll give this input 2, this one input 3. Now let's execute this, and definitely this is much better. If you don't like it this way, you can just remove it from here and add another list above this and put the element in there. So now let's check how this will be displayed. This is input 1 in row by itself. This is the first input, and then the text and the input in the same row for the other inputs. Okay, now let's check the list box. The list box is similar to the combo box, but it's a little bit different. I'll just copy these and I'll paste them in here, and I will change this to list box, and let's execute this. And this is the list box. You can select a value from it, but it's not similar to the combo box. Okay, you can scroll to get the last value. Okay, and this is the list box. Okay, now let's check how can we create a menu. I will create menu which will equal to file. The file menu is something like this. The and will represent the, sometimes when you open the application you will find that F is underlined, which means that when you click Alt F, in the keyboard, it will activate this file menu. The file menu will have open, for example. I will show you this exclamation mark in a second, and save. And let's create a separator and exit. This is the file menu. Let's create an edit menu. And again, let's ampersand, copy, paste, for example. And this is enough. Now let's create our layout. I'll just copy and paste this. I will create our menu is g.menu. I'll pass in the menu that we have created. Now let's run this, but before we run it, let's give some size for the window, otherwise it will be very small. Let's first check it without the size. I'll execute the cells. Now we can give the window a size. From here, size will equal to 200 by 200, for example. And this is not characters, this is pixels. Okay? So this is our menu. When I choose an item in it, it will display what I clicked on. So I clicked on exit. Okay? That's what it had returned. Okay? Now let's check what is the multiline. I will create, let's copy these. I will create a multiline. I'll just give it a size, 100 characters and 20 characters tall. I'll remove this from here. Let's execute this, and this is the multiline. It's like a big input element that I can type anything in here. Okay. And it will return it. I can also print to this window. So if I gave it a key, in fact, one of the projects that we will be using will be printing directly to this window to display the file names, for example. Okay, I'll click OK, and it has returned all the lines. Now let's check the output element. I will copy these in here. I will create an output element, and I'll remove these from here. I'll put them in the next cell, and in here I will check if event equals OK. This means that I have pressed on the OK button. I will just use a for loop for I in range of 100, print I. Okay, and then I'll put these two after the loop. Now let's execute this. When I click OK, it have printed everything. Let's do this one more time, and I'll put this cell in here. If I clicked on OK, it had printed to the output window. Let's execute this cell, and it had closed the window. And this is the output element. Now let's check the progress bar. I'll copy these. I will create a progress bar. The progress takes some parameters. It takes maximum value, and also it needs an orientation, and we will give it a size, and I will give it a key. As we said, the convention is to use the key in capital letters between two hyphens. Now our layout is ready, but we need to update the values, so I will create a for loop for I in range of the maximum value that we have defined in here. I will read. This time I will give the read function a parameter called timeout. When I use a read without a timeout, it will not execute the next statement until we created an event. But when I gave it a timeout, it will execute the next statement whether an event happened or not. Again, we will see this in details later. Let's check if event equals cancel, which means that I have clicked on cancel, or event equals sg.win closed, which means that I have pressed the close button. I have clicked the window close button, then I will break out of the loop. Otherwise, I want to update window of prog.update bar I +1. Okay. Now let's execute this. And this is the progress bar that you normally see when you are downloading something. Okay. Now let's check the radio button. I will create a 2-column layout. I'll just copy this and let's modify it. The radio button will be created by radio. I will create a radio button which will take a title and group ID. The group is very important, as you will see in a minute. I will give this group number 1. So this is the group ID 1. Okay. Now let's change this. This will be radio 2, radio 3. And let's copy this here. This will be column 2. This will be 4, 5, and 6. The titles can be anything that you want. I'll give this group ID 2. Now let's try to execute this. And this is our radio button. In a group, you cannot choose more than one option. So you can activate one radio button in the first group and another one in the second group. If I change this to group 3, for example, let's execute this again. Now you have 3 groups. I can select any radio button from this group, only one, and one from this group, and this is a totally different group. Okay. Now let's create a slider. I will copy these 3 cells. In here, I will create slider. The slider will take a range, which is a tuple from 1 to 100, for example. I can give it a default value, 50, for example, and I can give it orientation, which can be horizontal or vertical. Now let's execute this, and this is our slider. If I change it, the orientation to vertical, it will be the other way around. And when I click on OK, the event is OK, and the value is the current value of the slider. Now let's create a span. We are checking all the possible elements that we can use in our GUI. So you have an idea of what controls or elements that you can use. Okay, I will create a span. The span take initial value, and it takes values. The values should be a list. I'll give it range from 1 to 10, for example, and it needs to have a size. Now let's check this. We have a spelling mistake in here. This should be initial value, and this is our span. Okay, now let's create status bar. To show you what the status bar means, I will need to create something in the window. So I'll create a multiline. I'll give it size of 50 and 10. Then let's create our status bar. I will give it title hello. Now let's check this. We have forgot to add a comma after the status bar. Now let's execute this again, and this is our status bar. Okay, now let's create tabs. Tabs are used to group and separate elements. So we'll create something like the two columns layout. I'll copy this, and let's create tab 1. For example, we will put some text. Text will have title, tab 1 contents. And then I will create an input. I'll give it size 30 and 1, for example. And I will create two more of these, name and another input. I will just copy this. This will be tab 2. Okay, now we have created our tabs. We have to create a tab group that will contain the different number of tabs. So I will create tab group. The tab group will contain list of lists. We will create tab that will contain tab 1, and it will have title tab 1. I'll show you what this will look in a minute. And I will create tab 2, which will have title tab 2, and it will contain tab 2. Okay, now let's execute this. And these are the tabs. The elements in the first tab are appearing on the screen. When I click on tab 2, it will have the elements in the second tab. This is normally used when you have either large number of controls that you cannot display them all at once, or you are grouping different elements by tab. For example, this can be student attributes, and this is a course attribute, for example. We can have totally different elements per each tab. So I can add some more elements. I can add some more elements in a tab rather than another one. Okay. Now let's check the tables. I will create a tabular data. To create a tabular data, we will have to create nested for loops, for example. So the inner for loop will run from 1 to 11, and it will append I and j. Then when the inner loop finish, we will append this row to the date. Let's see how this will look like if I printed the data. This is a list of lists also, where each row is a list containing I multiplied j. Okay. Now let's also create a heading. The table needs data and a heading. I'll use formatted string. I'll give each column heading of call of I for I in range of 1 to 11. Now let's print the heading. Okay, so this is our data. This is our table header. Okay, now let's copy this, paste it in here. I will create a table. The table will take headings, which is heading that we have created, this one, and it will take values. This is the data. Now let's execute this, and this is our table. Okay, and if I selected a certain row, it will print that row in here. Let's execute this again. Let's select this one, and this is the row number 1, starting from index 0. This is the second row. Okay, finally, let's check the text element, and this is, we have been working with this from the beginning. I can create a text element. I can also create a text using sg.t, and don't forget the comma. Now let's execute this, and this is the text and t. Okay, now these are all the elements that you can use in any application that you can think of. But before we conclude this lecture, let's check some more buttons. We have started with the buttons, but there is more than one type of button in PySimpleGUI. So I will create text element. For example, please choose a file. Then in here I will create an input element, and the input that we have seen was a text box. Okay, and normally we use text box to enter some text, but let's check this one. I'll name this one file, for example, and I will add another button called file browse. I will give it title browse, and let's check this one. And this is our window. If I click on browse, it will open up an open dialog, and the open dialog can display all the file types. Okay, so you can display text files, DLLs, executable files, etc. But I can limit this selection by using a parameter called file type. File types takes a tuple. For example, I will say text files, and I will use asterisk.text, and after the first parenthesis I need to add a comma. So this should be a tuple of tuples. Okay, without this comma it will return an error message. Now let's execute this, and if you notice, it will only display the text file. Let's check the same directory that we have used before. Now there are no files appearing, and if you notice in here it's saying text. Previously it was displaying all files. Okay, so let's select this file, and if you notice, the input or the text box is filled in with the file name and the path. Okay, this is because the input and the file are both in the same row. So what will happen if they were not in the same row? I'll just click OK, and let's copy and paste these in here, and I will put this in a row, and I will put the file browse button in another row. Now let's check this. I'll choose the same file, and now the text box or the input is not populated with the file name, okay? Because the default behavior for the file browse is to populate the input or the text box in the same line. So how about this situation? If I wanted to populate this text box, I can use the parameter target. Target will take the name of this text box or input to use it as a target for the populate. Okay? Now I can populate the input or the text box without being in the same row. Okay? Now let's create some more buttons. We have multiple buttons that we can use. We have a calendar button. We have a color button. All of these are buttons. We have files browse, not file browse. The difference is I can select multiple files with this one. I have also file save as, and I also have folder browse. Now let's check what will this look like. This is a calendar, okay? I can navigate month by month or year by year, and I can select the date. The color is color browser, okay? This is the files browse. I can select multiple files. Since we have not specified file types, I can select any type of files. I can click Control, select different files, or press Shift to select whole number of files. Okay. Then the file save as, it will display the save as dialog box. I will just type in a name, and if the name exists, for example, let's take this one, it will display a message that this file already exists. Do you want to replace it or not? Of course, this is not connected to anything. This is just an interface. So as we will see later, I should connect this to certain function to make the work. Then we have the files. This is the folder browse. We should change this name, folder browse, to be clear. And when we clicked on cancel, you see that the calendar displayed which date that we have selected, color also, and all the other elements that we have used. Let's check this again. The folder browse will allow us to select a folder. Okay, now I'll just name this elements. Now this will conclude our elements lecture. Thank you for watching, and join me in the next lecture.